Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to particularly welcome our panel of experts. Ev, Ev Costello, is a senior program manager in data and technology, having joined CubeMatch 2 years ago, coming from a background with Google, Microsoft, and Meta. Delighted to have you here today, Ev.
Thank you.
Christina Curtis, who is a project manager and consultant specialized in recent years in ESG compliance and CSRD, an extensive background in the financial industry from asset management and insurance. And myself, Niamh Farrell, I'm the Group Operations Manager at CubeMatch and have extensive experience in ESG operational integration. So welcome again to everyone today. What we will be covering is an introduction into the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's a European Union directive and requires companies to report on their environmental, social, and governance impact. It's a component of the EU's Green Deal and aims to make the EU climate neutral by 2050. We will be looking at today how CSRD fits into the current ESG landscape, how the new reporting can be integrated into already existing frameworks, what are the key data points, which ones will apply to your company, the risks and particularly the opportunities coming out of CSRD that are transforming the financial sector, how it can lead to a more human-centric, customer-focused, technology adaptive, environmentally and socially conscious financial industry. There's a lot to cover off. Just before we start, I would like to put up a poll question just to gauge everyone's sort of how they're feeling about this as we go into it. So you should see a poll up on your screen there, just to understand where people stand on this at the moment. Okay, so thank you to everyone for their input there, and we will put up the results at the end. I'm just going to move across to Christina, and I suppose if you can start us off with why do we need these standardized corporate sustainability reporting?
Okay. Welcome everyone. Really the EU identified a need to strengthen corporate reporting on sustainability to provide investors and other stakeholders with access to more useful information about companies' material sustainability risks, opportunities and impacts to support the EU goals. So for stakeholders, it provides stakeholders with consistent and comparable information across companies to better inform their decision making. It also provides transparency and accountability on companies' material, environmental, social and governance impacts, risks and opportunities. It's known as IRO, related to the company's operations and the financial impact. It also provides a better understanding of how a company is managing, measuring and communicating their commitment to sustainable practices, transparency and accountability, which will, helps attract new customers and investees. For the reporting company, by identifying opportunities to innovate and grow can lead to long-term value creation. By improving their reputation and trust with the transparency and credibility of their ESG disclosures, also enhance their risk management and resilience by proactively identifying and mitigating risks and building resilience to ESG factors.
Thanks, Christina. And who's in scope and when do they need to report?
Okay, so for companies operating in the EU, so the CSRD is the primary framework, and that's replacing the NRFD. So phase one for reporting, to start reporting in 2025, is the large EU public interest entities and issuers that are already subject to the NFRD. And also non-EU companies with securities listed on the EU regulated market. So those with more than 500 employees. And they start reporting in 2025 for the financial year of 2024. And then phase 2 will be other large EU companies and non-EU, not currently subject to NFRD. So that's with 250 plus employees and or 50 million euro turnover and or 25 million in total assets. And they will then start to report in 2026 for the financial year of 2025. And then there's further phases. Phase 3 will be listed EU SMEs, and then phase 4 will be non-EU companies with EU activity for the financial year of 2028. So yeah, so it's going to evolve over the next few years.
Okay, so quite encompassing of most companies over the next few years.
Yeah.
And what are the main differences for those who have already been reporting on NFRD now as they move across to CSRD?
Yeah, so I think the key changes are there's the extended reporting requirements. So where companies are now required to report on material impact, risks and opportunities on their own operations, but also it's extended to the value chain, which is upstream and downstream. And there's more companies in scope. It's also forward-looking, so over the short, medium and long term, and will be part of the incorporated into the financial statement. Then there's the double materiality, which will assess a company's material impact on the environment and society, positive, negative, actual and potential. So it's an inside-out view, as well as the material impact on the company's financial performance. It's mandatory independent assurance. So first year will be reporting with limited assurance, and then it will be eventually moving to reasonable. The limited assurance will be to ensure that there's complying with the reporting standards and explaining any sort of underlying material assessment processes. There'll also be a requirement for digital format of the reporting using XBRL taxonomy, and so there's there is some fundamental changes, but at the core of it is the double materiality assessment.
Okay, thanks, Christina. And Ev, as we look at the ESRS data points, which make up the CSRD requirements, where do you see the impacts, the risks and the opportunities within these data points?
Let's not beat around the bush. Really, CSRD represents a significant shift in how companies are thinking about and managing sustainability data. So it'll be hard to give you an answer that is that's suitable for all companies, because there's not going to be one solution within every industry. Every company is going to be unique. So, but overall, key impacts would include there's going to be a need for detailed disclosures around environmental, social, and governance dimensions. So we're talking about CSRD requiring narratives, semi-narrative. Not talking about so the usual financial reports, which are very sort of you're a couple of numbers, monetary pieces and all that. You're kind of setting out goals, as Christina said, for short-term, medium and long-term. And there's going to be some risks with that as well. Obviously, the narratives are going to be data underpinned. So if a company hasn't worked on their data stack, there might be inaccuracies, issues of non-compliance if the CSRD isn't being taken seriously. So that could lead to fines or reputational damage down the line. Obviously, the main focus of this call is to focus as well on opportunities. So substantial opportunities would come out of this new reporting, as long as it's harnessed early and you get ahead of the game. Better risk management, the usual for regulation, improve stakeholder trust, which is at the forefront at the moment. People, consumers are looking for a more transparent attitude towards ESG and alignment with global sustainability trends. So you want to stay ahead of the curve with this. So for example, if you're scoping out scope 3 emission data, you could find inefficiencies and drive some innovation with that. So CSRD, it's really encouraging companies to engage in forward thinking, as Christina said earlier on, and that's the exciting piece about that. In order to stay, it's almost like corporate sustainability. It's about making sure that the company can ensure its long-term success.
Thanks, Evan. I suppose what we're seeing with companies we've looked into is, despite the size of this sort of regulatory compliance piece, that the opportunities can outweigh the costs here, that there are huge opportunities. Thanks. Christina, there's been so many sustainability standards over the last few years, and I suppose for those who've already started their journey, is there an overlap among them? Can they reuse what they've already done?
So there is some interoperability. There is a strong overlap of the ESRS E1 climate change with the ISSB IFRS 2, TCFD and GRI. There is a weaker and more varied overlap on the other topical standards of the ESRS. CSRD also aligns with the SFDR, so financial markets can use some of the standardised information from CSRD, greenhouse gas emissions, water usage and waste production to complete their disclosure requirements under SFDR. So that's really sort of the main sort of interoperabilities around this new regulation.
Okay, and would you mind, I know you've touched on it briefly earlier, but just explaining to us the assurance requirements around, some of the data that we're providing.
Yeah.
So the insurance, sorry, was that Eve?
Yeah, no, apologies. I can step in. This is
Sure.
from a data perspective. I talked about the narratives. I talked about some of the data points that would be going into the report. Now, part of this reporting is going to fall under the remit of the company's CFO. This is part of financial reporting. So the assurance will obviously vary depending on the disclosure requirements, which again, not one size fits all. The data that's going to be put in at an initial stage is going to be based on what's available, and you'd be needing to give like a limited assurance of its accuracy, especially where the topics are material to companies. So we might talk about materiality a little bit more later on to kind of guide people around what will need to be reported on. So we're talking about 1,200 potential data points, including narratives, but that's the absolute that's the full list of ESRS data points. So it'll be reduced based on what is material to each company. Now, in the short term, obviously, companies need to focus on their internal data verification, making sure that there's a robust processes around data, extraction, transformation, just making sure that you have like a sort of, if at all possible, single source of truth for those data points, but bearing in mind just how many different areas of the business is going to need to provide the information. From the initial stages, it's not going to be possible to have all of this centralized. We're looking for information from vendor management, from HR, going out to clients, going out to suppliers, reaching out to benchmarking companies. It's going to be very, very difficult to have that in place, but that is the aim going forward, to have a centralized sort of ESG data source. Medium term, then you'll be talking about engaging with your third-party sort of auditors, making sure they're aware of what the report's going to contain, especially with material topics, and implementing systems for real-time data collection, audit trails, etc., etc. So obviously, I've talked about the CFO earlier on. We're talking about C-suite and board accountability with this. It'll increase with companies needing to provide third-party assurance.
Okay, and I think what we're seeing is that this is, in many companies, is going to the CFO. This is, the reporting is up there with your financial reporting.
Absolutely, that's a big deal.
And I suppose, do you see this as being a short-term goal? Get in, do your reports, or is this really a longer-term goal? And I think, Christina has sort of touched on it, but to get your views of.
No. So embedded in this directive is talk about being forward thinking and long term. So the compliance deadlines appear to be short term. Obviously, you'll be reporting on this on an annual basis, but CSRD is a broader shift towards mandatory sustainability reporting globally. It's not, we're not taking boxes. We're embedding sustainability into business strategy. So it goes, as I said, it would impact sales and marketing, operations, supplies, investment decisions, credit access, choosing who your customers or your suppliers are. So for example, if you are reviewing as part of your procurement process a new supplier and you find that their ESG reporting is non-existent or it's lacking, this would need to be, if you choose to go with them, you'd need to incorporate this in your CSRD reporting. So it would steer the companies in the longer term. So it's not just about the reporting piece. It should be considered part of your day-to-day business.
And presumably, because it's touching so many facets of the company, we're seeing ESG departments pop up.
Yes.
But does this need to be integrated into the company?
So the ESG team's role will be sort of, I would see it as a central coordinating amongst departments, a little bit like a data governance team. They want to make sure that the data is collected, reported accurately, but there is going to be a lot of collaboration. And we're talking about that they'll be working closest probably with the finance teams. But in terms of setting up proper data collection, engaging with operations, engaging with HR to not just collect the data, but also align with sustainability goals and match them up with business objectives. So it's going to be a really pivotal role to be in an ESG team going forward with the CSRD.
Thanks, Ev. And Christina, to come back to yourself, I suppose a really important one, what opportunities do you see in CSRD?
Yeah, I think once a company has started to conduct the double materiality, they have a greater understanding of their material impacts, risks and opportunities within their operation and connected value chain, and the financial impacts over the short, medium and long term. And then using those insights, a company can then identify areas for improvement, assess those potential risks early on, and develop mitigating strategies, as well as sort of capitalise on the opportunities, and then integrating those into the business strategy will enhance in their sort of decision-making processes. So, for example, with the carbon emissions, obviously contributing to climate change, that's a clear sort of risk within a company and also their value chain. So, by investing in sort of renewable energy sources, there's a short-term cost, but then there's a medium to long-term, reduced operational costs, but also, there'll be less fines. Looking at sort of the poor labour practices in the supply chain. So looking at sort of more ethical sourcing practices and improving supply relationships, that can help attract socially conscious consumers. And another one is forward looking is the increased emissions with the growing AI usage. So tracking your energy efficiency, your cloud service providers, embedding sustainability criteria in within the purchasing teams, and just ensuring that that you're sort of aware of all these things that are going on in the in your operations, being aware of what those material issues are and making sure that you assess them and you capitalize on any sort of opportunities within there, looking at sort of your circular economy and your waste management as well, how you can implement zero waste policies, reuse materials. So I'm thinking about how that sort of impacts your local communities as well. So looking at sort of how you can sort of operate in a good way, you know, with your local sort of communities, but also looking at what those risks are, and how you can be a much more sort of sustainable company, and integrating, you know, that information, you know, in your sort of strategy, and ensuring that you that is part of your ongoing sort of, you know, assessment going forward. So it's and it's part of your operational sort of you know, updating your policies, procedures and frameworks, and getting, you know, the right people together in a room to, you know, to ensure that you capitalise on what those opportunities can be. And that will attract, you know, more, you know, it will attract more, you know, investment, and long-term sort of growth for the company. So having
Okay.
I'm
positive
not
impact.
sure, Niamh, apologies. I'm not sure that we covered double materiality. For anybody who is brand new to CSRD, and for looking at the poll that we had at the start, I would recommend that we do like a quick like
Sure.
a knowledge check on what it involves, because it's really the starting point for CSRD.
Sure. Christina, do you maybe just want to cover that off for us? Just,
Yeah.
you know, exactly what that is. And as I've said, some people on the call, this is new to them. They haven't been
Yeah.
reporting on NF4D.
Yeah, so I think, you know, with the double materiality, it's looking at what are the impacts, the material impacts to a company, the impacts, risks, and the opportunities, and how they can. So it's so how a company impacts, you know, the climate and local society, you know, and society. But also what that financial impact is. So it's so that's the double piece of it. So it's the impact of your operations, but also it's a financial impact to a company, and also, you know, that's extended to your value chain as well. So how their material impacts are, and how you can you know, capitalise on what those are, but also mitigate the risks surrounding that, and, you know, by looking at it also in a forward manner, of over a long so short and medium and long term.
No, that's a big deal. And really the way that I see it is it's almost like, I don't know if you can picture the old recycling logo, which is like an arrow kind of going around. It's like your impact on the outside world as a company and the financial impact that the outside world has on your company. So it's circular, really, a little bit like the circular economy, but it's just it's outside in and inside out impact. So that's the double piece to be aware of, just kind of reporting not just what the company is doing, but how it could be affected down the road with changes. So it really just gives you just an awful lot broader perspective, and not just kind of saying that this is what we're doing as a company, but it's also how, for example, if we had CSRD implemented years and years ago, we might have been able to prepare a little bit better for COVID and the global pandemic. So just that's what I'm personally most excited about with CSRD, is the double materiality piece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and to add to that, I think, you know, with the forward looking, you know, looking at sort of scenario analysis. So, you know, if the world continues to heat up, how does that, you know, impact companies with, you know, changing weather? Could also be increased diseases. How does that impact them as a company as they operate? But also, you know, their supply chain as well. You know, how, you know, where the locations of their supply chains, and also, you know, if it could cause disruption to their supply chain. Absolutely. So it's really sort of having that sort of, you know, insight into, you know, what those, you know, potential risks could be. So there can be actual or potential risks, opportunities, and impacts. And how they can sort of mitigate them, but also capitalise on it. So, you know, one of the things they can do is sort of invest in, you know, in technology, that, you know, would potentially sort of give them, you know, information on predictive analysis on extreme climate events, and then they can sort of mitigate, you know, with proactive measures. which, you know, could then, you know, reduce sort of, you know, potentially like claim payouts, you know, if you're an insurance company. So, you know, that looking at sort of how they can positively impact, you know, with these, you know, potential sort of and actual, you know, impacts and risks, and capitalise on the opportunities there.
Yeah, you mentioned insurance. One of the things that I've been reading up on is the fact that governments are starting to step up in order to provide almost like a reassurance piece of like a safety net, just with how volatile potentially the climate could be going forward. Regular insurance companies mightn't be able to absorb those risks. So you're seeing governments actually like planning forward for this. So it's yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But like should we talk about screening a little bit, Niamh?
Yeah, and actually just before we move on to that, I suppose one example of that sort of outside in and inside out impact, the social sustainability investment, you know, yes, there's an impact that building can have and the materials that are used, and as long as you're reporting on your, you know, do no significant harm. But public transport, investment in healthcare, investment in drinking water, education, huge opportunities there. There's a lot of focus on the environmental element. But there are big opportunities for the investment world to look at other areas, the technology that's going to be required. So yeah, lots and lots of opportunities that we're seeing as we delve into this and start to look at all of those data points. In terms of screening, Christina, maybe do you want to cover that off?
Sorry, screening of
sorry, the client screening and you know that screening of who you work with, or
so working with the supply chain in terms of screening with those. One of the ways that you can sort of look at that is by looking at the supply chain and who, you know, your tier one supply chain. So screening with doing some due diligence around your around who your supply chain are, what ESG practices they have in place, embedding that in your when you're sort of looking at you know, in your renewing contracts or taking out new contracts with companies, so ensuring that they have, you know, good working practices in place, that they are also committed to you know, sustainability, and that they are sort of meeting the, you know, reducing their emissions, and they have, you know, good diversity, good working practices. So you know, working with your, you know, very much sort of collaborating with your supply chain, and, you know, and doing that due diligence, questionnaires, you know, all that sort of good, you know, governance, to ensure that they are, you know, and, you know, it sort of impacts your reputation if there are any sort of negative ESG factors within you know, your supply chain. So it's important that you cover off that.
And Christina, presumably as well, in terms of credit access, companies are having to decide and screen where they invest. And I think we see where consumers are much more aware of this, you know, and there's obviously a lot of debate around this. Companies have to decide. In some countries, investing in alcohol companies or gambling may be acceptable, in others it may not. You know, investing in weapons companies may be considered acceptable or not, you know, maybe from a defense or from, and so I suppose there's a lot of decisions that banks and the financial industry are having to make that has a huge impact on shifts of money, which will be interesting to see where that goes in the future.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that part of their you know, working with the procurement team, you know, as part of their you know, questionnaires that they would sort of, you know, have in place, or part of their risk management, they would be looking at, you know, the companies that have you know, negative you know, sustainability practices, and, you know, and to ensure that they don't sort of, you know, potentially work with those sort of companies, because that can then, you know, impact that negatively
100%.
on their own sort of operations.
Yeah. And also bear in mind that if you're talking about credit, there is going to come a point in time where a company who can't demonstrate forward thinking in their ESG and sustainability practices will find it more difficult to get credit, and it could then result in, obviously if you're doing less business because you can't demonstrate that you'll be there in the long term, that's going to be a financial hit that a lot of companies need to take into account. So CSRD is very very broad in its impact. But how would you say, Christina, companies should get started? For anybody who obviously is used to an FRD or isn't, what do you reckon the first couple of steps are?
Well, I think it's important that they, understand whether they're in scope, what the timelines are, what the reporting requirements are. So I have that sort of, that education, and identify who their stakeholders are, internal and external. So do some, stakeholder mapping, supply chain mapping, partner. There should be should be a partnership with sustainability and the finance team. With this reporting. Build on the existing ESG reporting that they have, and then set up cross-functional teams, finance, sustainability team, include risk, compliance, legal, strategy, procurement, HR, engage in appoint roles and responsibilities to begin the double materiality assessment. And then also engage with the independent assurance at an early stage as well, so that they're happy with what the process you were sort of going through with the double materiality assessment, and then consider seeking guidance from experts to navigate complexities, and really sort of get ahead of the game.
Okay, and I suppose, Christina, we've spoken quite a bit on this, and really your message has been just start somewhere, hasn't it? Like, if you haven't started, okay, great. We're kind of getting towards the end here, and I don't want to run out of time. So I suppose there's two things that, if anyone has any questions that they would like to put in the chat, and if we don't get to answer them all now, we will certainly follow up with people afterwards. And the other thing we'd like to do is just to gauge, I suppose, a sense of where people are at the moment. So we're just going to pop up a short sort of poll questions just to get feedback on those. So I'll leave that up on the screen there for a few moments. And also interesting, I suppose, to hear if this has been helpful, if you feel like better informed, or if you feel like, oh wow, there's a lot to do that I wasn't aware of. So just really to gauge how helpful this has been. We will have more of these coming down the line, and we're certainly happy to email or to reach out to anyone who has any specific questions. So I suppose while that's up there, I'd also really like to say thank you to Christina and Ev for their time and their expertise. I know you're both really busy, so it's been really interesting chatting to you about this and understanding a little bit more about CSRD and what's required.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
So I can see there is answers coming into the poll. Thank you all for that. It'd be really helpful. And we will circulate that afterwards. There is no one who is looking for questions that we can answer here publicly, but certainly there's a couple there that we will follow up with afterwards.
It's always a good sign, isn't it? If you feel that you've pre-answered the questions that people had at the start of the call, that's a win for me.
Yeah, there's a couple that are quite specific, and we'll follow up with them offline. Yes. I think it is no point in covering them off here.
Because so, yeah, while the rules for reporting are going to be the same across all companies, but every final report is going to be different, and that's sort of the exciting thing about this. We're not all delivering the same amount of information.
Yeah, and equally we're seeing changes. I mean, Christina, we're just talking about this morning. There's still updates coming in as well. So
Yes.
keeping on top of all those changes in regulations and reporting.
Yeah. So the EU just recently, mentioned that that they're going to, they're looking at consolidating some of the overlapping sustainability regulations. So they're waiting for further information on that. So that would be the CSRD, EU taxonomy, the CSDDD. That was announced in November. So waiting to hear from further information. So this is constantly evolving. I think that's what people, companies need to be aware of, that they need to keep on top of the evolution of this. I think ESG is and sustainability is a really interesting topic, but there's definitely opportunities there, but trying to comply, this is it is a complex piece of work that needs to be done, certainly in the first year. For future years, it would will just be a sort of refresh unless there are any sort of fundamental changes within the business. But I think that initial sort of getting all this information together is quite a big task, and that's why it's so important to start pulling that information together, and start having the conversations within a company, and building on those conversations.
Sure. And there's one question that's come in, and I suppose it's just to clarify this. They're asking, where does a company start when implementing CSRD? And I suppose there is a bit of a chicken and egg as well here. Is it the materiality assessment, or is it understanding those ESRS data points?
I think that, there needs to be some sort of education first of all, so they understand, what this is about, and then start on the materiality assessment. So having that understanding of that actual directive, what the requirements are, and then pulling the right people together, key people in a room, having workshops, and then just start to sort of discuss what material risks and opportunities, and impacts that they see, coupled with the financial, the CFO, in those meetings, because they're the ones that are going to be reporting on it. So I think it's really important that's probably the best starting block.
Okay. So I suppose the accountability is with the board, getting everyone in a room, educating everyone around how this, impacts the entire company.
Yeah.
Understand the ESRS data points, and then looking at which ones apply to you.
Yeah. And then how you're going to pull all those data points together, for the reporting. So how that's, what that process is, because you'll need to document that in the report. So how that's all going to come together, is really important. So those processes, you have that in place, and the data is good data.
Okay. So I can see the poll results are up now. So 29% of people saying that their organization are using technology solutions to manage ES3, 14% partially but not comprehensive, and 57% still relying on manual processes, which is
hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose it's what we're seeing though, is that now people are really starting to look at this, and that'll probably shift over time.
Yeah.
Are the organizations equipped to collect and verify data required by CSRD? So 14% confident that they've robust systems in place. 71% feel partially, but there are gaps which we'd expect if you've been implementing NFRD, and 14% saying that they still need to build capability, which is what we're seeing, which is, I suppose not really a surprise. Are organizations looking to engage external consultants or partners to meet CSRD requirements? So 40% are saying yes, absolutely, and 60% are considering it. And I think, considering the vastness of this and the multifaceted sort of requirements, that that would be also were expected. So I suppose most people are looking at this now. And then how prepared does everyone feel? And this is really interesting. So 100% of those that have come back have said they feel somewhat prepared. So nobody hasn't started and nobody feels fully prepared. And I think, well, if anyone said they were fully prepared, I'd be surprised, because we've seen regulation coming in this week. So really, really interesting. We're going to.
There's been an uptake. Would you say, Niamh, there was an uptake from the original poll at the start of the call, so I'm delighted to see that.
Okay, yeah. But look, I thank you to everybody for coming along today and for taking the time to look at this. You know, CSRD is going to allow us to really power change for our companies, to see enhanced return on investment, to power change for the environment, for the world. The financial industry has the potential to have such an enormous impact. And I also feel it will be such a motivator for employees as well to be part of that. So exciting times ahead, lots of change, lots to do. Thank you so much, Ev and Christina, for your time. And thank you to everyone who came along. We will follow up with some of the more specific questions after this. And hopefully we will see you all at our next webinar.